what would happen? How would the West respond? Is really the question, I think. And Joe Biden hasn't been specific, and nor should he be. But there would be consequences, and you can't rule out a nuclear retaliatory strike on Russia. And goodness knows where this goes. I mean, the problem with this crisis is there's no off-ramp here for Putin. And as unfashionable as it is to say so, and this point's been made by shrewd observers such as the British historian Max Hastings and the former US Republican National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, now 99, as unfashionable as it is to say so, the Americans and NATO probably need to start seriously considering about giving Putin an avenue of escape. Otherwise, there's a very real danger that this conflict will continue to ramp it up and to the point where he might use nuclear weapons. I think the goal now should be to try to end the war, and in a way that doesn't humiliate Putin so much so that he feels the need to use nuclear weapons. It's an unfashionable thing to say, and the Ukrainians wouldn't want to hear this advice. But if we don't take that advice, I think there's a very real danger this conflict could escalate.
Well, it's interesting that Vladimir Zelensky is proposing that the West makes a preemptive strike on Russia. That's something we avoided throughout the entire Cold War. I mean, if we were able to avoid it then, why should we strike them now?
Well, exactly right. I mean, you've got to remember, even when the Soviets, the Hungarian uprising in 1956, and the Czech crisis, the uprising in 1968, and the Polish Solidarity movement at the height of the Reagan era in the early 80s. At no point did the American hawkish presidents like Dwight Eisenhower or Lyndon Johnson or Ronald Reagan even contemplate striking at the Soviet Union. And now the circumstances were different then because the Soviet Union was an empire. It genuinely had a very big sphere of influence, whereas Russia in 2022 is a declining great power. It's a giant gas station, but it's a declining great power. And it's a humiliated great power, but it can still cause a lot of danger.
It's interesting that you bring up Eisenhower. He's the man who coined the phrase the military-industrial complex. I think that has, and he warned us that in Western governments, it would one day possibly have far too much power. Do you think the military-industrial complex is whispering in Joe Biden's ear?
Yeah, there's some truth to that, but I think that this issue we're talking about in Washington has more to do with what President Obama's National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes said several years ago. The so-called blob, B-L-O-B, the foreign policy establishment, which of course includes the military-industrial complex, the intelligence complex, and the leadership of both major parties, both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And their belief is that even though it's been 30 years since the end of the Cold War, the United States should impose its will and influence across the globe, which means they are the predominant balancer of first resort in all three major strategic spheres, so the Persian Gulf, Europe, and East Asia. There are some of us, and we're a minority voice, I'd like to call us realists, who have been saying for the best part of 30 years that America, particularly after the humiliations of the wars in the Middle East, needs to reorder its priorities in favour of greater discrimination and prudence and selectivity. Can't be a top dog in all three spheres at once. It needs to focus on the real threats. And